The Ukrainian city of Sevastopol was founded in 1783 under the name of Akhtar, after the Crimean Tatar village that was located on the territory of the city. After the illegal annexation of Crimea, Sevastopol is under control of the occupation administration of the Russian Federation. The fact of founding the modern city, which Russia attributes exclusively to itself, is also controversial. It is well known that Sevastopol was built at the expense of southern Ukrainian lands, the territories that cover the southern part of modern Ukraine, the Crimean Peninsula, as well as Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Mykolayiv, Odesa, and other oblasts. After the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 that Russia had lost, the city for some unknown reason began to be called the City of Russian Glory. The Crimean or Eastern War was a military confrontation between the Russian Empire and the allies of the Ottoman Empire. The reason for this war was Russia's desire to expand its influence in the Middle East, which had once been dominated by the weakened Ottoman Empire at the time. The direct cause was a dispute between the Orthodox and Catholics over the right to holy places in Palestine. Turkey settled the dispute in favor of Catholics. It was then that the Russian Tsar Nicholas I decided to become the defender of all the Orthodox, who were subjects of the Ottoman Empire. They found the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca of 1774 in Petersburg, under which the Russian Empire became the patron saint of the Orthodox population of the Ottoman Empire, which numbered approximately 12 million at that time. So Tsar Nicholas I ordered the occupation of two principalities of Moldova and Wallachia, allegedly under the pretext of oppression of the national and cultural rights of the local Romanian population. This is typical of modern-day Russian politics, when the Russian-speaking population and Orthodox shrines were allegedly taken under their protection.
Якщо ми говоримо про різноманітні інсинуації, ми говоримо про...
If to speak of various insinuations, we're talking about myths and clichés. This is how the official Russian historiography was characterized. In particular, this is about the fact that Crimea is allegedly a sacred land for Russians, just like the famous places in Palestine for Muslims and Jews. This is how these mysterious stories, especially those related to attempts to inherit the ancient past, began. Historians say that Sevastopol was allegedly founded on the site of the ancient Chersonese. The truth is that this is in fact the ancient settlement of the colonists of Heraclea Pontica of 528 to 529 BC. It is in no way related to modern-day Sevastopol, since there was an order of Russian Tsarina Catherine the Great that she signed herself, in which it was written that this settlement was founded as a military town on the territory of the former Crimean Tatar settlement of Akhtar. In short, all these historic facts were documented, and there are no sacred traces to be found. Both today and then in the mid-19th century, the Crimean War was a war of civilizations, a war of the backward Tsarist Russia against an educated Europe. After the 1848 revolution in France, European countries embarked on the path of democracy. The prototype of the Euro-Atlantic civilization had already appeared. Russia was suppressing the efforts of the European peoples to go along the path of the progress by force of arms, which earned it the nickname Gendarme of Europe. Technically and economically lagging behind European countries, the Russian Empire tried to reverse the course of history and reinforce its position in Europe with arms. The Ottoman Empire had been weakened, So Tsar Nicholas I decided to extend his Russian world to the Balkans.
Османская империя прошла апогей своего развития, и российская дипломатия.
The Ottoman Empire had passed the peak of its development, and Russian diplomacy started systematically exploiting the issue of the Orthodox population to allegedly protect its rights. The war broke out because Russian Tsar Nicholas I was elated by his success suppression of the Hungarian Revolution of 1849. He was nicknamed the Gendarme of Europe exactly on this occasion, and he decided to fulfill the testament of Tsar Peter I to lead the Russian military naval forces out to the never-freezing southern seas and assume control over the Black Sea Straits of the Bosphorus and Dardanelles.
И установить контроль над Черноморскими проливами, Босфором и Дарданеллами.
Austria and Great Britain were against such an intrusion by Russia. They were supported by France and the Kingdom of Sardinia. Russia's insatiable appetites led to a war in which Sevastopol played a key role.
Российская армия, да как и само государство, находилась.
The Russian army, just like the Russian Empire, was 2 steps behind the European armies. All attempts to unblock Sevastopol proved to be an exercise in futility.
Русских войск деблокировать Севастополь не увенчались успехом.
Tsarist Russia lost the war, its fleet, and 150,000 of its subjects. Afraid of being unable to keep the distant Alaska under its control, the Tsar decided to sell it, which is the reason for such a meager price of just over $4.50 per square kilometer. The Crimean War ended with Russia's defeat and shame. In recent history, no country has sold its territories. Russia's defeat in the Crimean War became the main cause of a deep crisis of the entire regime that was established by Tsar Nicholas I and eventually led to his quick death. In order to conceal the shame of losing this war and justify the blasphemous sale of their land, the Russian Empire gave Sevastopol the title of the City of Russian Glory.
Что еще можно было, чем имидж улучшить?
How else could Russia improve its image in front of the world community?
Сообществом. Вот оборону
They remembered the defense of Sevastopol, the defense that lasted 349 days and is exclusively attributed to the strength of Russian weapons, and so on and so forth.
и так далее и тому подобное. Исключительно русского оружия, да, в обороне.
It is true that regiments with original names such as Yakut, Okhotsk, Kamchatka, and Selengin, this is the Far East, took part in the defense of Sevastopol and fighting on the Crimean Peninsula.
Это Дальний Восток. Но на 2/3 они сформированы.
But they were comprised of 2/3 of recruits from the Ukrainian-speaking population of the Kyiv, Podil, and Volyn provinces.
Волынской губернии.
For some reason, the fact that military units formed in Ukraine also took part in the fighting were completely forgotten in the imperial historiography. In particular, this is about the regiments from Volyn, Zhytomyr, Kremenchuk, Odesa, Podil, Poltava, and Chernihiv. Southern Ukrainian Cossack formations also fought on the Russian side. The Azov army that was defending the coast of the Azov Sea and the Danube army that was defending Odessa. The defenders of Feodosia, Berdyansk, and Ochakiv, who were also attacked from the sea, fought no less heroically. The Petropavlovsk defense commanded by the Ukrainian governor of Kamchatka, Vasil Zavoyko, a Poltava nobleman with Cossack roots, was also heroic. The defense of Sevastopol was the most important, tragic, and heroic page in the history of the Crimean War. But the fact that both Crimea and Ukraine were part of the Russian Empire at the time does not mean the glory of Sevastopol's defense belongs to Russians only.
Можно сказать, что Севастополь полит кровью Украины.
We can say that Sevastopol is covered with the blood of ethnic Ukrainians.
Приписывать себе только лавры.
It is not necessary to attribute the heroic laurels just to oneself and say that Sevastopol is a city of glory for Russian sailors. But for the sailors who were subjects of the Russian emperor from Ukrainian provinces within the Russian Empire, Sevastopol is indeed a city of their glory.
Славы их.
Here is a photo taken 50 years after the defense of Sevastopol in 1904. It shows the heroes who survived: Kalina, Yevtushenko, Dudchenko, Barabash, Subota, Pavluk, Nastoburka, Horobets, and Sarana. From 41 veterans of the defense of Sevastopol, only 3 have unambiguously Russian names. According to official statistics, in this war Russia fought mainly with Ukrainian forces, as up to 50% of the troops of the empire were soldiers, sailors and officers of Ukrainian descent. Moreover, Ukrainian sailors made up about 70% of the Black Sea Fleet. Ukrainians from the surrounding southern regions who were accustomed to hot climates were recruited for defense. They were called Hrytsky in Sevastopol. Only the commanding officers were mostly Russian. They were also quite unsuccessful, since they still surrendered Sevastopol to the enemy forces. The first defense of Sevastopol is associated with the names of Admiral Nakhimov and sailor Kishka. Both of them were Ukrainians.
Военный комендант Севастополя, вице-адмирал Павел Нахимов.
Sevastopol's military command Vice Admiral Pavlo Nakhimov had a pedigree that went back to Hetman Ivan Mazepa. Fedor Nakhimovsky was one of those who remained close to their hetman in the struggle against Russian Tsar Peter the Great for the independence of the hetmanate right to the last dying moments.
В борьбе против Петра I за независимость Гетьманщины.
Soldiers and sailors called Admiral Nakhimov Khvat Nakhimenko. Khvat means fast on his feet and cunning in battle, and Nakhimenko because it sounded more like a sailor's surname, which means that the defenders thought that a typical sailor's surname should sound Ukrainian.
Или вспомнить хотя бы
Or, for example, take the hero of the Sevastopol defense, Petro Kishka, a native of the Nemirov county in the Podil province.
губернии.
Even though the legendary sailor Petro Kishka was renamed Koshka in Russian history, he did not become Russian because of that. 10 regiments were created from Ukrainian recruits and militiamen. In Poltava alone, 9,500 people voluntarily joined the national militia. There were also the Black Sea Cossacks, descendants of the Zaporizhzhian Cossacks, who moved to the Kuban. The volunteers were formed into the 1st Tatar Regiment, the creation of which was funded by the local Karaids. During the defense of Sevastopol and in the ground forces of the Russian army alone, over 25,000 Ukrainians were killed. The fact that it was a Ukrainian war is not just proven by the national composition of the Russian army. The war was taking place on the territory of Ukraine, not only in Crimea, but also along the entire coast of the Black and Azov Seas. Ukraine was providing logistical support to the military with food, ammunition, weapons, clothing, horses and forage. Meanwhile, the Russian army was outright robbing Ukrainian peasants. Here's one of the examples that we found in a book about the history of the village of Kozatske in the Chernihiv Oblast. Referring to archival documents, journalist and ethnographer Mykolayiv writes about those times as follows. In those times, the army was stealing oxen from our villagers. They did not pay all the cattle owners. In particular, Ivan Kolomiets, who gave the soldiers 8 oxen, was not paid for any of them. Cossack Pavlo Romanenko was not paid for 6 oxen, and Maria Omelchicha for 4 oxen. In total, people living in the Bykivsk region did not get paid for 47 oxen. These robberies and oppressions gave rise to a saying in these parts: "The Moskals have devoured our oxen, and when they return from Crimea alive and well, they will definitely devour all of our pigs and cows." The supply of the Russian army was extremely poor. The railway to Crimea was built only in the 1870s. Food was transported by oxen along completely worn-out roads, and it rarely reached the front in full. In one way or another, the Crimean War affected most of the residents of Ukraine of that time. It had a devastating effect on its economy and demographics. Being part of the Russian Empire and having lost the signs of state sovereignty, Ukraine was forced into a military conflict of Russia with other states. It was forced to take an active part in the Crimean War and donate its human and economic resources while shedding blood for the interests of the Russian autocracy. So as it turns out, due to imperial historiography, Ukraine was deprived of even the right to remember its victims and losses of its people and soldiers in this shameful war.